What's going on, guys? Aco here, and today we're breaking down how to easily transition over to Street Fighter 6. Now, Street Fighter is a game with a long history, and despite being basically the grandfather of all fighting games, there are a lot of fans out there who have never played a Street Fighter game and are looking to jump in with Street Fighter 6, or maybe you're on the fence about it and you're not sure if this is the game for you. That's basically what we're going to talk about today. If you're more used to the more modern games, such as something like a DBFZ or a Guilty Gear Strive, I'm here to basically break down the differences in Street Fighter from something like those games. You know, I'm a huge Street Fighter fan, and obviously I'm very big into anime games, so I thought I could offer an interesting perspective for people that maybe you've only played anime games and you haven't played Street Fighter yet. You know, where should you get started? What should you be looking for? What are the differences? Those are the kind of things we're going to talk about today. Now, Street Fighter 6 has a very cool cast of characters that are all very different. You know, you've got grapplers, you've got, you know, zoners, you know, you've got like specialty characters, you know, you've got all things in between. And in order to decide what character is best for you, you're probably going to need to know more about how the game actually functions and what kind of things are considered good in Street Fighter, or, you know, how the game even works in general before you can even decide on a character you want to play. So my goal is, by the end of this video, to help get you to that point where you can decide what character you want to play and start enjoying Street Fighter 6 along with everybody else. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right on into it. So in order to help you decide on a character that is perfect for you, let's go ahead and talk about what the basics of Street Fighter are. And I don't really mean the mechanics. Again, this game has a great tutorial that breaks down all the mechanics for you. I mean more so, what is the general idea of Street Fighter? What sets it apart from other fighting games that you may be more familiar with? Well, in Street Fighter, the main focus of the game is simply to control space. In Street Fighter, you have more limited movement options. You know, there are no air dashes generally. You cannot run generally. You have a very short range dash. Character walk speed varies. Some characters walk very quickly, depending on their tool set, and some walk at a more noticeably slow pace, and anywhere in between. It really is on a character by character basis. It is also very important to note that in this game you cannot block in the air. Once you jump, you are making a full commitment and you are completely open to your opponent's counterattacks. This is what makes Street Fighter both challenging and fun at the same time, because literally every decision you make, from, you know, movement decisions to button placement to special move decisions, everything is meant to be more calculated and thought out in order to turn the tide of the match more in your favor. So with all that in mind, how do you actually play Street Fighter? What are the go-to options? That's going to vary a lot based on your character choice, but again, the overall idea is by controlling space. For the sake of an easy to understand example, and you can apply this to most characters, let's just take Ryu here. You know, the ultimate starter character, you know, the archetype for almost every fighting game character, you know, ever made is Ryu, and that is for good reason, because Ryu has, you know, the standard tools that you need that are easy to understand and very effective to use. So let's go ahead and take a look. So of course he's got his standard fireballs, right? So the point of the fireball is to just simply cut off this horizontal range here. By throwing the fireball, you can vary the speeds. First of all, you got the light, the medium, and the heavy. And this is meant to, of course, throw off your opponent's timing, because when you're doing this, when you're throwing your fireball, this is limiting their movement options and slowly pushing them to the corner if they decide to block it. Not only that, you're taking away their gauge if they choose to block it. So just by doing this, you're forcing them to take some kind of action, because obviously if they're doing this, you cannot challenge with a button. Like a fireball is going to beat a button every time. So this is like the first layer of what you would call controlling space in Street Fighter, you know, the fireball game. Now, of course, it's not quite as simple as that, right? You can't just keep the opponent at bay forever with a simple projectile. One bad fireball can lead to you taking some massive damage. This is where the jumping comes in. Usually jumping is used when the opponent predicts some sort of special move or some sort of whiff is coming, and if they're right, the reward would be big damage, but if they're wrong, it is a potential chance for you to counter them instead. And that, of course, brings us to the second part of the standard Shoto kit, the original uppercut, the Dragon Punch. That's right, the actual DP. We call everything that looks like this in every other game a DP, but this is the real DP. This is actually called a DP, and the primary focus of this is to anti-air opponents. So that is why Ryu is such a staple, because he has his fireball, which cuts off the horizontal space, and then he has his uppercut, which stops jumps. So with just these two things, it allows you to play a very standard, straightforward game before you even get to the point where you start using your buttons. Now, of course, special moves are not the only way to control space in Street Fighter. You'll also be heavily relying on your buttons. This is where the majority of the game happens. These two things in unison, but mostly your buttons, due to the fact that overall your buttons are going to be a lot more safe. As we said before, when you do something like a Hadouken or any sort of fireball, it's going to be a lot of recovery that comes along with that. So usually you're going to want to fish with your best normals first, because something like a crouching medium kick is a lot harder to whiff punish than a whiffed fireball. So this is why the usage of buttons is very important. And when you decide on a character, you're going to want to find, their best ranged buttons. In this game, what makes a very good ranged button is one that is cancelable. That is because when you actually make a connection with your long range poke, you want to be able to cancel it. Pokes that you can't cancel are still very good, because there is a chance that on counter hit they can net you a combo, but in general you're looking for good, low recovery buttons that you can cancel. That way when you're fishing for hits, if the hit goes through, you can go right in for either some pressure or a guaranteed combo. And when you put all this together, that's when you get the essence of Street Fighter, which is basically you and your opponent both trying to control as much screen space safely as you possibly can. So now that we understand the fundamentals of controlling space, let's talk about what happens when you actually get close to your opponent. So in Street Fighter, what are the go-to options for up-close pressure? Well, Street Fighter is a strike-throw game. That is to say, this game is based around putting buttons on your opponent's block and mixing up those buttons with throws. Throws come out very quickly in 5 frames, so they are completely unreactable. But what the opponent will be reacting to is the gap. So what do we mean by gaps? Basically, you cannot throw an opponent who is currently in the middle of blocking something, which means you have to leave a gap, which would look something like this. So because of that fact, when playing Street Fighter, this situation is what players react to. If you do a single button and then pause, at that moment you can either continue your string, fishing for a sort of counter hit option or making the opponent think that you're going to throw, or actually going for the throw. And there are all sorts of different variations of this, but this is the general idea behind the strike throw system. And now the reason this is so effective is because if your opponent does believe you're going to throw them and they try to break throw, the only way to break throw is by throwing yourself. Now in Street Fighter 6 specifically, throws are extremely unsafe. If you trick the opponent into believing you're going to throw them and they whiff it, they are left in a counter hit state, which leaves them open to a heavy combo. As you see how it said punish counter on the side there, and the character sort of shakes when they get hit. This gives you extra frame advantage to do big combos. So in that situation, you can do your max damage combo, which can be, easily up to 50%, or you can just keep it simple and outright super. It is very dangerous to get caught trying to throw tech, especially towards the end of the round when the opponent is stocked up on meter. That is another very important factor of Street Fighter. Street Fighter is a huge cash out game. It's sort of similar to something like DBFZ, where you save your 5 bars to get the kill. Street Fighter is similar in that aspect as well. You save your meter so that when you finally get that big hit, you want to cash out into your level 3 super for maximum damage, and more often than not, a whiffed throw tech is going to be that situation. So besides the usual strike throw, what else can you do when you're up close? Well, there's a lot of options you have, and as you can see, do not be alarmed, but I have the frame data on, so this is going to help with this section. Please do not be afraid of frame data. I know it scares some players away, but remember that frame data is your friend. All it is more information, and in Street Fighter specifically, it helps you out a lot. Let's go over that real quick. So in Street Fighter 6, what sets it apart from other Street Fighter games is that almost all of your buttons are negative. That is to say that you technically lose your turn whenever you do a button. This is very different from older Street Fighter games, because older Street Fighter games, usually fast buttons like jabs were plus, and that would allow you to, continuously stagger someone until you get your throw, or until, you set them up for a counter hit, different things like that. That aspect still applies to this game due to the chain factor. While this doesn't have the same kind of chains as something like the Dragon Ball FighterZ or Guilty Gear Strive, you can chain certain buttons like your lights. The fact that you can delay your light like this, like I can put delay in it, makes it to where even though it's negative, it's technically not really negative because I can chain it. So when I start doing this, even though I am negative, it's not giving my opponent an option to mash on me because they are actually in danger of getting counter hit. So that's what leads to situations where you start doing this, and this, and this, and this, and stuff like that, and then finally mixing in the throw and stuff like that. And that's how your general staggers in Street Fighter are going to go. However, some characters do just outright have plus buttons. As you can see here, DJ, his close medium is plus. Usually the more sort of mix-up oriented characters have this, where they'll have like a singular plus button. You'll have to go through your character's move list to see, but when you have a plus button, that does just open up a little bit more options for you. That's not to say that if your button isn't plus that you have 0 options though, however, because even if you don't have one that is plus, a lot of characters have one that is neutral. As you can see, Ryu's crouch medium is neutral on block, so that means he doesn't lose his turn. It's both of your turn, but since this is a stagger based game, your opponent's not gonna swing right away. And the main reason behind why your opponent wouldn't just swing right away is because you can always cancel into a special move. So let's say that I do this medium here and my opponent knows this move is not plus and they want to swing. I could tack on a special move afterwards, and if they were to swing, they would get hit by the special move, which would either give me a knockdown, perhaps give me a combo, give me the opportunity to continue my pressure, all sorts of things. So the main idea behind block strings in Street Fighter is just the threat of a follow-up, whether that follow-up is a special move or a chained button or just a button that is hard to intercept if the opponent is not already mashing. So what happens when you actually get your hit? As we said before, Street Fighter doesn't necessarily have chains unless you're talking about jabs or character-specific target combos, which are built-in character-specific chains that are unique to certain characters. Generally, you're going to be using what are called links. In Street Fighter, you do links, which is, as the name suggests, the linking of 2 buttons. Now, admittedly, this is where the game gets a bit complicated, but let's just try to take it one step at a time, right? So every button that you connect is going to stun the opponent a certain amount, and depending on that button, it may allow you to chain another button. So I know that sounds a little complicated, but let's just take a look at Ryu, the base example, right? So Ryu, if I do his close medium, it will stun the opponent enough for me to do a crouch medium. As you can see on the side there, it said 2 hits. So that is what is known as a link. I'm literally able to link my crouch medium after my stand medium because it stuns the opponent enough for that. However, on the other side, what if I were to do a jab? See, that does not link because my jab does not stun them enough to actually give me a combo. However, that does change when you get a counter hit. A counter hit happens whenever you either interrupt your opponent or if you hit your opponent after they have whiffed or after they have done a reversal. Any of those three things will net you a counter hit. And as you can see here, if I counter hit, now I am allowed to combo my crouch medium. So as you can see, combos are very character specific and they are very situational. This is where basically the fun factor of Street Fighter really comes in, because you have to be very aware to land your combos. We already talked about how the block strings work, and you can probably already see how this all fits together now. So usually in a block string, you're going to be fishing with your jabs. Normally your jabs don't give you anything, but if you actually get your opponent to swing or whip a grab or do something that's going to give you a counter hit, that's when you can finally get a combo. When it comes to combos in general, this game is kind of crazy for a Street Fighter game. I feel like they leaned a lot into, like, you know, the anime side of things, because this game has some really crazy combos. Again, this game has a great character tutorial, so once you decide on your character and you understand how combos work, make sure you do the combo trials, because they do teach you some really good combos, and they teach you what buttons that you're going to want to be fishing with in order to get combos with the character you're looking to play. So what about defense? How do you defend yourself well in this game? In Street Fighter 6 specifically, they've added a lot of defensive mechanics and a lot of ways to help you out of just constantly getting pressured. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those options that you're definitely going to want on your side when you start going online in this game. So the first and most common, which everyone probably already knows about, is just your reversals. Most characters have an invincible reversal, and usually it requires some of your drive gauge, the gauge at the top. Again, make sure you at least have done the tutorial by the time you watch this video, that way you know all the basic mechanics. But usually your invincible EX move or your invincible super are going to be your get off of me options. But keep in mind, those are very risky because, again, if you get punished in this game, you take a lot of damage. So use those very sparingly. And to help with this, again, this game has some really nice built-in defensive mechanics. The first of which is simply just the parry. If you do the parry, whether by hitting the button or hitting two medium buttons together, the parry is a great option to just get the opponent's buttons off of you, even on wake up. It is very low committal, especially on wake up. And if your opponent hits you on the first available frame, it's possible you'll even get a combo for parrying. So this is a very good and safe way to get off the ground while making a defensive decision. The only thing that really beats this is for your opponent to simply throw you. Your opponent would have to throw you. Throw will beat a parry every time. But if you feel like your opponent is constantly putting buttons on your wake up, keep in mind that the parry is a great option for that. Just in general, if you feel like your opponent is really bullying you with buttons, just keep the parry in mind, because you might not always get a combo or even a punish, but it is a great way to just defend yourself in general against buttons, and especially fireballs from a range. If you're up against an opponent who is just trying to completely keep you out with fireballs, just remember that you lose nothing by parrying fireballs. Literally nothing. If you take a look at my drive gauge at the top, I'm not losing anything. I'm getting my drive gauge back. I'm not taking any chip. And basically the opponent is just wasting their time at this point. Especially if you have the health lead, this is a great option to prevent yourself from falling into your opponent's pace if they're just trying to stay away from you and throw fireballs. Now, if the opponent is just all over you and you feel pressured and you just don't know what to do and you're tired of blocking, you do have the option of doing a drive counter. That is where you press forward in both heavies. It costs a good amount of drive gauge, so be wary of that, but it is a great way to get the opponent off you relatively safely. As long as your opponent does not predict that you're going to do this, this is a really good way, especially to get out of the corner and to get players off of you when they have committed to strings or special moves. And of course, probably the most infamous thing in the entire game is the drive impact, which is an offensive and defensive move at the same time. You know, this lunging parry is a huge part of the game, and it's something that you're always going to have to keep an eye out for. So drive impact is really great defensively and offensively, simply because it eats through buttons and fireballs. So if you get a really good read on a fireball or a really good read on a button, this is a great way to just instantly turn the tide in your favor. But it is incredibly risky because, for one thing, if you simply just neutral jump it, you will get a huge punish. And whoever does it first loses in all situations. So anytime you do a drive impact, you are taking a risk if you just throw it out there, because at higher levels of play, the opponent is going to really be looking for this. And at any level, if your opponent does a cancelable button, they can always switch into it after doing a button. So while this is probably the best defensive option in the game because it beats so much, it is a huge risk. And again, just like your EX uppercuts, you should use this very sparingly because it is such a heavy commitment. And lastly, I'd like to go over just a few tips for using your drive gauge effectively. It's no understatement to say that Street Fighter 6 is the drive gauge. Literally, it affects every single aspect of the match, whether it's the neutral, the up close game, the combo extensions, the Oki. Everything goes back to drive gauge, so you want to manage it as best you can. And you want to use your meter in smart ways that minimize your risk, because this is a pretty big damage game. So the good thing about the game being so heavily drive gauge based is that it helps you in a lot of different situations. So we talked before about how important it is to make good movement decisions and how your movement is generally pretty limited in this game and you want to be careful about jumping too much. Well, that is where the drive gauge really comes into play, because due to the fact that you can drive rush at any time, even from a range like this here, you can immediately get in on your opponent if you see an opening. Like if your opponent whiffs something, or if you just don't believe that they are ready, even from as far away as this, you can drive rush in and be plus. Let's take a look at that frame meter again. Please don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of the frame meter. As you can see, if you do a drive rush into Ryu's stand medium, he is +3. So you literally went from I'm back here to boom, I'm now in, and right there, +5. So this is a great way, and it doesn't even cost that much drive meter to do this in order to get in. As you can see, it only took 1 bar, and now I'm on the opponent's block in plus frames. And, you know, I have an opportunity to get, you know, my pressure going, whether that's, you know, fishing for hits with a button or going for a shimmy, you know, to get them to try to throw tech, whatever you want. And all I spent was 1 drive gauge bar. Instead of doing something risky like a jump that's very telegraphed and easy to counter hit, you have a very fast and very good option that nets you basically the same outcome. Because usually the reason people jump is because they want those plus frames that you get from forcing the opponent to block a jump in. Usually when the opponent blocks a jump in, you're very plus, and it gives you the opportunity to go for, you know, a shimmy situation, which is a strike throw situation. But now you don't even need to do that now that drive rush wields the same reward, and sometimes better reward, than a jump in. The same can be said for when you're on your opponent's block. If you're on your opponent's block and you're finding them particularly hard to open up, a drive rush can be great here as well. Keep in mind, when you do it from a cancelable button, you only need to press forward in order to get it out. But as you can see, since it's such a strong option, it does cost you a whopping 3 bars. So if you're going to use this, make sure you use it at the right moment, and make sure that it's not a situation where you're going to get burned out. But it is a great option because you can immediately go for the throw, you can take your plus frames, you can extend your turn. It does a lot being able to drive impact from someone's block. But again, it is a very costly option, so make sure you don't use it too much. And if you're having trouble covering your opponent's wake up, drive rush can be great in this situation too. Due to the way Drive Rush is set up with its long distance lunge and plus frames at the end, it can almost auto meaty opponents for you. Like usually when you do a Drive Rush on the opponent's wake up, because of the fact that the slide takes a second and you can delay it, this is a great way to get on your opponent's wake up while still letting you keep your turn if they do actually decide to block. It's a really, really good option for when your opponent's getting off the ground, especially if you have a special move that knocks them a considerable distance away from you. It's a great way to very quickly and efficiently close that gap. And that's gonna bring us to the end of the video. I feel like I covered just about all the major, like, basic fundamental aspects of the game. At this point, you should have a really good understanding of what to do in Street Fighter, and you should have enough information to pick a character that works for you. This game has a lot of really cool and really unique characters, and again, it has a really, really good character tutorial, so make sure you check those out once you pick the character you want. If you feel like I left something out or you still have questions, definitely leave them below. I will answer whatever questions I can. I've always been a really, really huge Street Fighter fan, and it feels good to be able to play Street Fighter again. Like, for those that don't know, Street Fighter was my original fighting game, so I'm excited to be back on Street Fighter, and, you know, I'm really eager to, you know, share any knowledge that might be able to help anyone. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see some more Street Fighter action. Please leave a like if you found this helpful. We're definitely going to be doing a lot more Street Fighter content in the future. But once again, thanks so much for listening. This has been Mr. Acolyte, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.